Hi, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for our second webinar on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Today, we're going to talk about how to create a culture of belonging. My name is Becky Siekmeyer, and I'm the director of the Scitec Internship program at the Minnesota Technology Association, and I will be your host for today's discussion. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Scitec Internship program, which is the host for today's discussion. Scitec connects college STEM majors to paid internships in small for-profit Minnesota companies. We've placed more than 2,000 interns statewide since the program began in 2012. And the program is funded by the state of Minnesota, which allows us to provide a wage match that covers 50% of an intern's wages, and the cap for that match is $2,500. The program is free for both students and employers, and it's a really great way to find tremendous talent for your organization. We have about 100 wage matches remaining yet for this year, and we expect to allocate those funds probably in the next 4 to 6 weeks. In your control panel, there's a handout section that we'll be referring to a few times today, and in there you'll find a flyer about the Scitec program that can give you a little bit more information, or you can check out our website, scitecmn.org. I am so excited to introduce the 3 seasoned professionals who are joining me today for our discussion. First, I'd like you to meet my good friend, Sonia Simpson. Sonia is the founder and CEO of IANA Solution. She uses her depth of experience on workforce issues to develop talent strategies that are inclusive and equitable, from the pre-hiring process through retention and culture. In addition, IANA Solution has a vast network of solution providers and will help your company find the right fit for the resources it needs. Sonia, thanks so much for being with us today.
Well, thanks for having me again, Becky.
All right, next we're going to meet Michael Burchard. He is the Associate Vice President of Equity and Inclusion at Inver Hills Community College and Dakota County Technical College. Michael has dedicated his life to advocacy work for low-income and historically underserved populations, and he leads the Min-State Indigenous Men and Men of Color Work Group. In addition, Michael has taught college courses on race in America, American Indian Studies, and human relations in the metro area. Michael, we're so glad that you can be here.
Thank you for the invitation and to be able to come back again.
All right. And last but not least, the new member of our panel is Patience Ferguson. Patience is the Chief Human Resources Officer for the City of Minneapolis, where she strives to foster an inclusive workplace environment. She develops strategies in talent acquisition and development, workforce planning, labor relations, diversity, equity, and inclusion, total rewards, and employee engagement. She's also the recipient of both the Diversity in Business Award and the Women in Business Award from the Twin Cities Business Journal. Patience, welcome to the panel. We are so glad that you can be with us.
Thank you for inviting me, and I look forward to this time together with all of you today.
I just want to say that I appreciate all of you for donating your time to this cause. None of our panelists are being paid for today's event. Our goals for this webinar are to help you understand the value of belonging for all employees, to discuss behaviors and actions that obstruct a culture of inclusion, and to provide ideas and resources on how to create an inclusive culture in your organization. We understand that DEI can be an uncomfortable topic, so we've intentionally created a brave space for all of us to have a real conversation to talk about the challenges your companies face. We're using a virtual format where we can't see the audience and the audience members can't see each other. And so our goal is to provide you with the opportunity to get your questions answered and in turn provide you with ideas on how to take action in your organization. And we are so glad that you're all here. Let's begin our discussion today with a definition of inclusion. Inclusion is the I in DEI. It's about ensuring all people feel included and welcomed. So why does inclusion matter? Inclusion in the workplace is one of the most important keys to retention. That's because employees are engaged when your culture is inclusive. Inclusive workplaces enjoy employee retention that is more than 5 times higher than organizations where the culture is not inclusive. Inclusion means that employees are more likely to look forward to going to work, are more likely to have pride in their work, and are more likely to want to stay at their company. So when your organization is truly inclusive, all individuals are valued and integrated. Each person can participate and contribute fully to and bring their whole self to work. Each person feels a sense of belonging. Sonia's going to share more information about inclusion, belonging, and what gets in the way of having an inclusive culture. Sonia?
All right, thank you, Becky. I think that was a great setup. I was thinking about, for the past few weeks, I've been thinking about belonging and what does it actually mean? And how does it feel to feel belonged to something? And so I want to bring you in. I like to do kind of these things where I actually bring you into my experience. You know, I did the hair pick the last time, and that was really exciting for me to just be able to be online to do that, to share with you that our hair doesn't make us, right? So this time I want to share with you an experience that I had, me and my husband had this weekend. This weekend, my son came home from UW Stout, which is only about an hour and a half away, and he came to visit us. He hadn't been at home since the holidays, okay? So I really want you guys to think about this, really put yourself in my shoes. And so when he came home, he said, "Mom, I'm coming home this weekend." I was excited. We were all excited. We wanted to see him. And we knew that they're not going to have spring breaks this year. So when am I going to see him? You know, this is his last year. He's a senior in college. He'll be graduating. Stout has high recommendations. He's looking for a finance internship. Wink, a plug. so, he came home and we were expecting him to walk in the door, unpack his stuff, and turn around and zip off in the car and leave and go and hang out with his friends. And he didn't. So I said, "Why aren't you going to go hang out with your friends? You're home, but now you're not hanging out with your friends." And he said, "Mom, I just want to be home. I want to be in a quiet space. I want to be in a safe space where I can just focus on work and just be around you guys." And I thought about that. I started thinking, that's actually belonging. That's actually a feeling and a sense of belonging and safety. He wanted to be around people that he could let his hair down with, that he could be himself around, that he could get away from his crowd and the people that he's been hanging around with school and partying with and all that kind of stuff, and come home and just relax. That's belonging. Pat Wadar, which was the creator of the word belonging, states that diversity and inclusion might capture the head, but belonging captures the heart. We're talking about the heart of things. She also says diversity is a fact. The numbers are what they are. She states that inclusion is a choice, right? Inclusion, you decide whether to include someone or not. But belonging is a feeling that can be enforced by a culture that you can purposefully create. And remember the last webinar that you watched, we were talking about being purposeful, being courageous, being reality focused. It's when you can purposefully create. Belonging or inclusion is having an individual sense of acceptance. Research shows that people mask to a far greater degree at work than we ever imagined. A Deloitte study of more than 3,000 people found that 61% of people cover at work, or basically assimilate at work, right? That's what they're saying when they say cover, assimilate. And for the BIPOC community, that's upwards of 79%. So let's talk about the ROI. We talked about ROI the last time, qualitative and quantitative ROI, right? It states that qualitatively, 56%, there's a 56% increase in job performance. There's a 50% drop in turnover. There's 75% reduction in sick days. You know, when people like to go to work, they'll go to work even if they're sick, and your boss has to shoo them away, right? They have to say, "No, you get out of here because you're sick and you're passing germs around." And especially now, oh my goodness. 167% of free employer promotion. 167% of free employer promotion, meaning you don't have to put so much effort in advertising your company, because those employees that feel a sense of belonging are out there sharing it with their friends. You need to come to work at this company because I feel like I can be a part of the conversation. I feel like I can be a part of that table. Okay. It also states that employees doubled their raises with 18 times more promotions. Now that's some statistics for you. Because we're social beings, we enter a job wide-eyed and hoping that we have made the right choice. However, Harvard's report says that 40% of people feel isolated at work. 40%. So when it comes to, I don't think that we can afford that. And especially now with the Gen Z folks, your millennials and your Gen Z are so different than us. They are social media generation, willing to speak their minds, willing to express themselves freely, demand more from employers. Gen Z folks are going to come into your office and ask you questions. They're going to go and review you on Glassdoor. They're going to go and check you out on PayScale. They're going to look up everybody and even ask their friends, what is it like working at this company? And guess what? They're going to want to see themselves at that company. They're going to see you being partners with your corporate responsibility, your social responsibility evident on your website. They're going to ask those hard questions. They're going to want to ask you things like, am I the only person that exists here that looks like me? Am I going to have to go to lunch and sit by myself alone in isolation? Or am I going to feel like I'm a part of this company? Is someone going to welcome me, embrace me, and not ask me about things like my hair or want to touch it, or make me feel some way other than, right? So we talk about all of this to kind of bring you up to what are those things and behaviors that causes companies to not embrace a sense of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And today we're talking about creating a culture of belonging, right? So there's things like microaggression. Thank you, Becky. Microaggression, if you look at that little bee, is that bee that's constantly, picking at you. There's something that's constantly saying, sticking me and stinging me and saying, I don't feel good about this place. Something here doesn't make me feel like I'm a part of the organization. And just to help you to understand what microaggression is the everyday, subtle, intentional, and oftentimes unintentional interactions or behaviors that communicate some sort of bias towards historically marginalized groups. Okay, and women. I want to say women. I'm a woman, and I know that there's certain things even with women that we go through. You don't have to be a certain group to understand that, because that sometimes is unjust. It's really about learning how to be empathetic with people, learning how to understand their culture, learning what could, or should I say, unlearning bad behaviors, right? I was watching, and when I say that, I was watching an old movie the other day, and I was like, I love this movie. Wow. So many things is wrong with this movie. And I loved it. But when you watch it, you're like, oh my goodness, we can't do that today, especially not with the Me Too movement. That kind of stuff doesn't happen today. We have to unlearn stuff, right? So some themes that go with microaggression are, and I want to read them off to you. When people ask you, where are you from? You don't look 100% Black. I don't even understand that one. We could go all day on that one. You are so articulate. I'm sure, Patience, you've heard that, man, and Michael, we've heard that so many times. You are such an articulate person. When I look at you, I don't see color. Well, we all see color. I have a blue wall behind me. Look, it's dark blue. I love color. Okay, I'm from Texas. Texas loves color. Okay. I have, you know what? I relate because guess what? I have a lot of Black friends. Um, Everyone can succeed in this society if they work hard enough. And those things kind of resonate. You're lazy. You don't know how to get in and work. That's not true. That's not true. So when it comes to microaggression, we could go on and on and on about the language, and we will. We're getting ready to get into it. We're going to go on and on and on about it, and we want you to have really good questions. Don't feel any fear about asking whatever you have to ask. Just go for it. We're here to help. And so, Becky, I'm going to turn it over to you because I think I'm probably over my timeline by now.
It was excellent. I want to mention that Sonia also gave us a handout on microaggressions that's in the, it's also in the handouts panel and in the control panel. And I just love the framework because it's so straightforward. It just really spells it out. And I'm sure that a lot of us that are watching this today can recognize these examples in our own lives and are possibly never even realize the impact of some of these statements and how they've made other people feel. And so I'd like to ask the panel to talk about, given what Sonia has shared, can you talk about microaggressions and how they impact someone's sense of belonging at work?
Well, I can jump in, and I'm going to come from a couple of perspectives. I'm going to come from my own personal experiences and also just things that I've heard from other employees, whether it's been at the city of Minneapolis or other organizations that I've worked with. I think one of the things that I've seen more since moving from where I'm from, Oklahoma, which is close to Texas, and I'm going to say why that's important, and Sonia can back me up on this. The cultures that we come from, and I've said this to people who are from the South, and I may offend some of you, but one of the cultures around the South is you know where people stand.
Oh,
They are racist. You know they're racist because it's very overt. And so when you come up in that type of a culture, at least everybody has their cards on the table, and you know directly how to deal with it because everybody's going to just tell you how they are. And as a transplant moving from Oklahoma to Minnesota, what I've observed is people sometimes in workplaces wanting to go along and get along. And so they will say things to you in front, and how they move and maneuver in a workplace setting is they go behind your back and they say things. And so on the surface, it looks as if they think you're the best thing that happened since sliced bread. But behind the scenes, they're talking about you, they're gathering, if they don't like how you present yourself or they don't like your style, then what they will do is talk with other people to kind of rally around those folks to try to make a case against you. Not recognizing that all of those behaviors are actually pushing that individual out. Now, here's why that's important. That individual that you're doing that to may be one of the brightest people, has nothing to do with their education, has nothing to do with their experience, has nothing actually to do with how competent they are. But because they have a style that is not commensurate with your style, you've made a value judgment to exclude them. And they may have had one of the best ideas that it could have saved your company millions of dollars, could have taken you to another level organizationally. Now, those are things you can measure. You can measure if someone has saved you money. You can measure if someone has increased revenue. You can measure if people have brought other individuals in the organization to fulfill the mission. But because of things that are subjective, you've made a conscious decision to exclude them. And by doing that, you may inevitably cost something. More than just that person leaving, you could have cost additional revenue to your organization. You also may have just unintentionally caused a person to leave. And from the HR, if any of my HR colleagues are on this call, let's talk about the cost of hiring people and the cost of retaining people. Every single time someone walks out of your door, that's money, right? Because then you've got to post for the position, you've got to hire someone, you have to recruit someone, and it typically takes about 90 days to onboard that person. So I want to come from money, because see, money is the thing, it's about revenue. Just because you have an environment where they were different than you, and so you push them out, that's cost to your bottom line. And the other part of that, if I may add, is that then that person who had a negative experience with your organization, because people do not leave organizations, they leave managers. They're going to tell their closest friends how you treated them. So that could be a market share that you lose because of individuals within that organization who have created a culture that says we're not going to address the issue. Let me also add one more piece, if I may. Let's also look at this from a performance management piece, because here's something I've always also observed. You don't deal with a person who may be different, maybe because of race or gender or ethnicity, and because you're afraid to address their performance issues, you don't do anything. And then that person is there for 5 years, and then a new manager comes in, and then when they address it, that person is going to file a discrimination lawsuit against you. Because guess what? You were too afraid to address that person's performance issues, thereby you have treated them differently. So those are some specific HR related kinds of things that create a sense of, that impact a person's sense of belongingness at work.
You know, when I start thinking about microaggressions, it brings me back to James Baldwin, and he said something like, "I can't believe what you say because I see what you do." And I'm a big fan of him, and so I can't believe what you say because I see what you do. And so when I think about microaggressions, and it's easy for us to see what overt racism looks like. When I was a young activist, every day my spouse and I received phone calls from the neo-Nazis, the Minnesota militia, the KKK. In fact, they even shot my house with my spouse and my child in the house. And this is, I'm not telling this, to be, outrageous. This is true, and this is what overt racism looks like. But microaggressions are really that passive racism, whether intentional or unintentional. They create harm. They create an environment that doesn't feel good, and it's something that we need to address. And as we lean into this work, as we make these mistakes, because we will make them. I myself make mistakes, even though I'm a DE&I professional. I'm still vulnerable. I'm still a human being, and I make these mistakes. And the important thing is how do we acknowledge them? How do we start, checking ourselves? How do we start doing the work? Because in terms of BIPOC communities, we often have to take on this labor. It's like almost like being a BIPOC tax. So like, I don't get to just be, for example, an academic advisor, or I don't get to just be an engineer. I also have to be the person that teaches the entire organization about my community, about my organization. And I'm not being paid for this additional labor, but this is something that I still have to do. And so as our organizations start thinking about this work in new ways, this diversity, equity, and inclusion work, this is something that we really have to think about and really consider. So how do we have our employee resource groups within our organizations to give that space? How do we allow that time for those groups to be able to connect and to grow together and to share these experiences, and then to work with our HR professionals to say, hey, here's some trainings or here's some opportunities that this organization could use so they can start thriving to create more of this sense of belonging. Because again, back to James Baldwin, I can't believe you. I can't believe what you say because I see what you do. Let's reverse this, right? So as we think about it in assets-minded thinking, let's let your actions, the way that you're doing, create that sense of what our community is thinking about our organizations. I'll pause there in terms of time.
Well, the thing that I love is you guys have said some great things. Patience. You talk about the overtness in down south. It's true. We know where we stand. We know how to move around. They'll tell you in your face. And so you just keep stepping, you move around, you whatever. Here in Minnesota, it is a passive aggressive nature. I liken it to like they smile in your face. What's that song? All the
The
while.
OJs, the
Yes,
backstabbers.
backstabbers, they smile in your face with backstabbers. It is true because and the thing about it, when I think about, the analogy with my son is just we have to realize that they're going, yes, you'll get employees that will come in and they may not be a right fit. There may be some that are just not a good fit. There are others that are a right fit, but they have different ways and styles and language and that kind of stuff that you have to adapt to. And they want to be a part of it. It will ebb and flow. The issue is literally embedding practices from the leadership all the way through and down and up that says that we are going to allow people to be a part of our organization, to come in and do their job, and then help them get to that place called there, and then help them get promoted. They're going to move, they're going to leave, and they'll come and go. But if you can eliminate turnover to the best of your ability, and I think you guys have said it, how do we do that? We start looking at how can we be better people? How can we have a heart? How can we implement feelings into our practice? Understand that people are people and they're not going to be like me. I'm different. Patience and Michael and Becky, we're all different. So how do we work? How do we get along? This microaggression thing is real. I remember one time I had a conversation with a person and they were just constantly, I would say something and then they constantly reinterpret what I said. And I said, okay, did I not just say that, but in my own language? And they would reinterpret what I said either to me or in front of other people. And I said, I think I know how to think and articulate whatever I have to say. Why is this person constantly reinterpreting what I'm saying? And I didn't even know what was going on, but it didn't make me feel good. I just knew that every time I was around this person, I tried to avoid that person, right? Because I didn't want them to interpret everything that I said. And at the same time, I didn't really know what it was that was giving me angst, except the fact that every time I say something, he's reinterpreting it, right? And eventually he came around and I didn't want to be on any teams with him. I mean, I completely avoided him, right? And I didn't want to be on any teams. And he finally came back to me and said, hey, every time, they say that we're supposed to work together, you'll take the other way, the other route, right? And say, no, I'm not going to go. And I said, it's because every time I get around you, you make me feel lesser than. And I don't want to feel that. I feel as if I'm not articulating appropriately for anybody else to understand what I'm saying. And I know that I am. You know what I mean? So I know what I'm saying. And he sat back and he listened and he began to change. But that's what we actually have to do. We have to get bold. We have to be able to say, I don't like that behavior. I didn't know what it was that was bothering me. I couldn't call it microaggression because I didn't know that that was microaggression. So I called it what it was. Stop rephrasing what I just said. and then maybe we can get along.
Yeah.
In the last session, I had mentioned that diversity, equity, and inclusion, like as we start leading into work, that we have to understand that it's an ongoing process. So as we're having this conversation, it's not that we're expecting every organization just to flip the switch or start checking the box, because we have to be committed to this work. It's not like an achievable goal. We're really looking at becoming transformative organizations rather than transactional organizations. And so when we're thinking about these things related to microaggressions, it's what is the training that we're giving to our supervisors that are creating this environment where, in particular, BIPOC employees are, and when I refer to BIPOC, I'm meaning Black, Indigenous, and people of color, where BIPOC employees feel like they belong, feel like they're a part of that organization. Because if we put it in writing, like how does your employee lean into equity, inclusion, and diversity work? If the supervisor themselves doesn't have a clear understanding, then how are we going to have them be rating or giving feedback to their employees on how they're doing in this work? So we really have to be thinking about what is the training, what is the efforts that the organization is giving to make sure that we share common values, that we have an understanding of what the common values are around diversity, equity, and inclusion within the organization. And this will really help to create that sense of belonging and start to diminish some of those microaggressions.
I'm going to go ahead to our next question because I think we've already started to kind of jump into this, and that is, what are some specific actions that employers must take to create a culture of belonging? And one thing I'd like you guys to address is, how do people report issues when something's happening? Like, what kind of reporting process should companies have? And what do you do if the problem is at the top of the organization?
Well, I can just give some thoughts. One thing I want to say first before we talk about maybe some of the reporting. First of all, every organization is different. And so I don't think that there is a one-size-fits-all approach, because what may work in my organization or the organization that Sonia leads or Michael leads may be totally different. But I can tell you one specific thing that you can do is say hello. And I don't say that being glib. I can remember moving here many, many years ago, and people, it was like I was invisible. I'm like, okay, I took a shower this morning. I think I smell okay. But just by a simple hello, my name is so-and-so, how are you? Just working to just build relationships. And you don't need to ask people what they do for a living. You need to ask people about families, because that's also culturally specific. In my family, I was raised that you don't tell people your business. So I'm not going to tell you all that information because that's my business. And there's nothing wrong with that. But you can say, hi, my name is, in my case, hello, my name is Patience. How are you today? If it's their first day, we are so glad that you're here. You've developed a connection with someone. And then allow that person, when they feel comfortable, let them tell you what they want to tell you about themselves. But just a simple hello is one thing that you can do to begin to start building that relationship with people. And the other thing, and it really depends on the organization, is, I'm a big fan of employee resource groups. I think that we have about 6 now in the city of Minneapolis, all driven by employees. And I personally meet with the group once a month and their executive sponsors. But I've learned, and many of them in our organization are the millennials, and they have no problem telling you what they think. Sometimes I have to go and say, oh, Lord. But, because they will tell you. But I think, what are some mechanisms, easy mechanisms within your organization that you can do to really create that sense of belonging? When they came to us, we made sure that this was not just seen as a support group, which that is a part of it. But now what's beginning to happen is they're starting to influence policy. And I'm like excited. And so I won't get into any detail for confidentiality reasons, but we had a situation where our Black employee network gave feedback and we were on a call, and I didn't realize I was doing this because I was smiling and I didn't know it. And one of the leaders of the Black Employee Resource Group sent me this text and said, "You were just smiling like a proud mama." And for me, what I felt good about this was that they felt free enough to give the feedback and to speak their truth. And I didn't even realize I was smiling because I'm like, "Oh, this is great." But my point in all that is that, figure out in your organization what works for you. And the other thing I would also add is this cannot be a one and done. This has to be continual. You have to be willing, and I say have to in caps. You have to be willing to be able to stand and be uncomfortable. Because if you're not willing to be uncomfortable, I had one of my staff tell me this week about a situation that he had with some of our BIPOC employees. And he told me, he said, "Boy, I was uncomfortable, but I'm willing to stand in that uncomfortableness because I want to grow." Right? And so I think the other thing too that I just add before I stop, don't take it personal. Okay? If your desire is to create an inclusive environment, don't take this personal. You're on a journey. And if you need to get you a journal and write things down about how you feel, if you need to find a colleague within your organization that helps you work through it, if you look at the why and the bigger picture, is the bigger picture about how you feel and how they made you feel because of the fact that they said some things that you didn't like? Or as the professional that I know you are in whatever organization you work for, you came to an organization because of the mission. And if the mission is around creating a culture of belonging, I would submit to you, it would be in your best interest to not take it personal and say, "This is part of my journey. And you know what? I'm not feeling good right now. I may even feel ashamed. I may even feel guilty. But guess what? I'm going to deal with that. I'm going to get somebody to process it so I can work through it, because my ultimate goal as the leader and professional that I know that over 300 of you on this call are, I'm committed to creating a culture of belonging, which means that I'm going to have to get comfortable with not being uncomfortable. Because here's the flip side of that. You have people that are coming into your organization and they're feeling uncomfortable. So if you use this as the opportunity to try to understand how people, BIPOC employees, how women, anybody that's different, you can then come from a place of empathy, because now you feel how people feel when they come into an organization that is not like who they are. So that would be some tangible things that you can, that I would submit for you to consider.
So Patience, when you said that you were talking about your ERG groups and their millennials and they're now talking about creating policies, it probably made them feel like they had ownness in it. When I work with construction people, they always tell me, "I built that building." You know what I mean? I did that. You know what I mean? Because they took ownership of the work that they did to build the US Bank Stadium, right? And so they say, they could tell their kids, "I built that building. I helped do this. I helped do that." So your ERG group they're doing the same thing. Now they're feeling like they're part of the ideation of what they do in policy at the city of Minneapolis, and they feel like they're home, right? Another thing that you talked about is don't take it personally. This is not a personal thing. This is unlearning, right? We're unlearning things. There's things that we used to say back in the day that now I have to unlearn not to say it any longer. You remember the phrase when in microaggression, when they would say things like, "You're an Indian giver." I can't say that, Michael. Can I say that?
No, you can't. No, don't say that. That's not good for your health.
So look, time out, right? I can't say that any longer. We used to say that, and people used to get along with that. We used to say, "Well, there goes the price of tea in China." Can I say that? Okay.
No, yeah,
No,
not good.
you can't say that, right? well, I guess they're going to eat some watermelon this weekend. Can I say that?
Not a good look.
No, that's not a good one to say.
So what I'm saying is you can't get too personal. Like you said, patients, do not take this personally. This is just, it's about you asking yourself, what are the things that I need to unlearn, right? And then how can I change my behaviors, right, Michael?
Well, but what I would say is that, and it's not a matter, we often hear this word, well, is that being politically correct? No, it's not being politically correct. It's about showing respect for your fellow human beings, right? That's what it's about. And it's also about that BIPOC people are finding their voice, and
Yes.
that they're not going to allow themselves to be diminished in these ways. And so we are going to be speaking up and sharing our experiences. And I want to go back to what Patience had said about saying hello, because it reminds me of when I used to coach basketball. And when one of the kids would go down the court and would make an amazing shot, all the other kids would stand up on the bench and they'd be, I see you, right? Because that hello is about seeing your coworkers, your colleagues, and seeing them as human beings and what they bring, how they can bring their whole selves to that work. And so I really, glean on that point that Patience makes about that intentionality of seeing your colleagues and seeing your employees. The other point I want to mention too is we often want to turn to our BIPOC employees as being the experts around these topics.
And I knew, Michael, you were going to say that.
Yeah.
So,
And we got to be careful about that because they're not necessarily experts. And one of the stories I tell is, we had a meeting recently, the group of us, to talk about this presentation, and I had to not be there because my stepdad had a heart attack. And when my stepdad had a heart attack, he went to the hospital because that's where the experts are that know how to fix people with heart attacks. Now, my brother-in-law had also had a heart attack, but what my stepdad didn't do, he may have asked my brother-in-law, what was your heart attack like? But he didn't turn to my brother-in-law to heal him or to fix him because my brother-in-law is not a trained professional in this area. And so as these organizations begin to learn more about diversity, equity, and inclusion, remember, there are experts out there in the field that are doing this work. Sonia, Patience, myself, we're professionally trained to understand these topics and these issues that are surrounding diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so to create that sense of belonging is, I appreciate you as colleagues, especially my BIPOC colleagues. I want you here. I want to hear your perspectives, but I'm not turning to you for all of the answers around how do we fix our retention problems? How do we fix our recruitment problems? How do we start doing more business with BIPOC companies? They are there to do their jobs as professionals, and they are going to bring their whole selves there if you appreciate them and acknowledge them. But allow the professionals to do their job. And if you are one of those professionals, then you need to make sure that you're getting the training that you need, that you take on the personal responsibility of that learning yourself. So that's so important that you continuously grow. And I know later on we're going to talk about resources for growing ourselves, but that's an important aspect.
but before we get off of this, I know Becky asked this one question, and I said, wow, I think this is going to be a tough one. She said, what do you do if the problem is at the top, starts at the top, right? What do we do? Because I know I took my master's degree in organizational leadership, and we talked about leadership, period. How do we lead people effectively, and where does it start? And culture actually starts at the top, right?
Absolutely.
We always have this thing that, where's the bad seed at? Where does the badness start? It's always somewhere weaved in the top ranks, right?
Absolutely.
And so then how do we, if the problem is at the top, how do we convey change methodologies to get them to get the top people to say, I want a DEI practice that's embedded within my company, and because we aren't doing what we need to do? What are some of what can we do? Michael, I know that you were talking about the scorecard thing in our
Sure.
past, building out a DEI scorecard in the past thing. I don't even think you got to it because
Yeah.
you know.
I think there's a couple of things here, though. I think one is you have to think, your own self, right? Like how in marriage counseling, back in the day and taking psychology and in marriage counseling, if a couple is going through a hard time, you kind of have three options, right? You can continue to live in the situation which you're in. You can decide to separate yourself from that situation, or you can both lean in to work on making changes. And so you as an individual, you have to decide on what is best for your own well-being. Because as BIPOC people, or even as people who are advocates for white people who are advocates for diversity, equity, and inclusion around anti-racism, you have to decide, is this organization an organization that I'm willing to actually lean into to help them grow and make changes? Or is it better for me to step away? Or because I have to pay my bills, I have all these responsibilities, do I just mind my own business and keep going as I'm going? That's one thing that we have to think about. The other aspect is, as the organization itself, if you are an organization that you have leaders that aren't necessarily willing to lean into this work, but you want to, this is where employee resource groups can become handy, or you can find other leaders that are starting to lean into this work, and they can show their allyship, or they can show how they can be accomplice to this work and start speaking up and using their power and their influence to start creating organizational change. And I know Patience probably has some additional things to add.
Yeah, I mean, your first response to the question was one I was initially thinking about too, is that I think that as an employee, number one, it's you have to practice self-care. And depending upon, number one, where you are developmentally, where you are financially, where you are positionally, you may have to make that decision. And I would not, and it really depends. I mean, if you have financial, constraints, you may not be able to just leave your job, but you should have some sort of a plan, whatever that plan is. It may be different for different people. If you're in a position of leadership and you're in a position, and that could be not necessarily by position, but it could be just because you have certain relationships, then do you have the ability to try to have courageous conversations with people? I mean, I can remember, and this was years ago in my journey, and I was fairly new in the city. I mean, not in the city of Minneapolis, but new to Minnesota. And I had a situation with a person, and this is just as an example of a person that was in a key leadership position in the organization. And they had treated a board member whom I knew, who was a person of color, inappropriately. And I was in like more of a mid-manager position, but not in a VP position. And I needed to confront a leader because I didn't want to see the way that this person was being treated. So I got together with one of my colleagues, and I literally wrote out a script. And I said, I want you to look at this script. I want you to tell me what you think. Can I do some role playing with you? She said, yeah. And she was a white woman. So we worked through this little role play and everything. I said, okay, I got a script. Because I also wanted to make sure I was very clear on what my objective was. And this was not even about me. It was how this person of color on the board of the organization that I was a part of was being treated. I walked into the room because I practiced, and I used my script, and I said what I had to say, and I was prepared for that person getting defensive. But because I had worked on my script, I didn't flinch. Mm-hmm. Later on, what ended up happening is, and here's where it gets really fabulous in my personal opinion. Some other things happened. This wasn't just the one situation, but some other things happened with this particular individual. That individual left. Well, let me tell you about the board member without disclosing any confidentiality. I know because as this person in the organization that didn't have that kind of power, I advocated on that person's behalf. That person ended up getting, throughout his career, ended up being in an extremely powerful position within the city. And if I say who it was, you know who it was. but because I was willing to support them in that journey and give them the support. They didn't even know I did this. That person has gone on because he found somebody who was their ally. So my point in all that is you really have to do what you can do. Some cases you might be, I got a family to feed, but you know what? I'm at least write my experiences down. I'm gonna give me a journal and I'm gonna write. You know what I mean? In some cases, if you're in a position of power, use your power. In other cases, you may have to get an ally, but really do what, number one, preserves your sense of self. You still are practicing self-care, and it gives you a sense of power and ownership depending upon where you are and in your journey.
Yeah, those are great. I think we don't have any questions from the audience at this point, but if people
Actually, Becky, yeah, we do have a few. I'd be happy to read them off.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so one quick question. Someone wants to know if they are allowed to share the resources that are provided in the handout section. Can they share that with their networks?
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Awesome, great. So this other question here comes in, and someone is pulling off of an experience they had previously. They said, I worked with the HR rep and employee at a previous company that they worked at, and this individual was not performing well. They were talked to multiple times about either being on their cell too long or taking longer breaks than what was given to them. It was documented that this person was coached and talked to, but it did not get better. And in the end, they were asked to let go. That person then came to them and said that this was an issue, that they were fired for being a person of color. So the person asks, how do you address these accusations without creating an issue within your culture?
Well, that one's a little bit deep. And I think that there has to be kind of a better understanding of all of the details. And sometimes what I would want to know within this conversation too is who gets to set the standards? Who gets to decide what is considered okay or not okay, right? Like, so for example, in the classroom, when I teach, my students, they can speak out whenever they want to. And I encourage them to speak out whenever they want to. Other teachers expect you to raise your hand, right? So who is creating that standard? I teach in the way I teach because that is from one of my cultural norms, right? That's from my culture. We sit in a circle, we talk in certain ways. And so I think it's a matter of understanding all of the details. And again, going back to what Patience was saying to the beginning, if this issue wasn't addressed by a previous supervisor, and then a new supervisor is coming in and addressing this issue, now it becomes a bigger issue, right? So what is those standards, especially connected to DE&I work? I don't know, Patience, maybe you follow.
Yeah, I don't want to be prescriptive here because I don't know all the ins and outs of that particular situation. What I will say though is the importance of consistency. What we sometimes see is that, and I want to qualify this and say this is not advice. I'm not telling you what to do because I do not know all the circumstances surrounding it. What I can tell you in general from an HR best practices perspective, it is very important that individuals understand what's expected of them. No different than in a educational situation. When you're working with students, the students need to know what the rules of the game are. And just like in an employee situation, employees need to know upfront, what are the expectations? And here are my expectations for you as an employee. And I'm going to manage you on those expectations. Now, I don't think it's a very good practice to then not say those in the very beginning and then wait a year and then don't do anything about it.
That's right.
Because there has to be a consistent process. So if that means I'm doing a weekly check-in with someone, I'm sure many of you know the situational leadership model, which means that, when a person starts, you may have to be a little bit more directive because they're learning the job. Was that person onboarded properly? Did the person have another supervisor who was a little bit more not as directive? But it's really important that you're intentional in setting expectations and then managing those expectations. But don't wait a whole 6 months before you manage the person, okay? because that's where I have seen in my career where sometimes supervisors fail. Or you do one thing and you hold all this stuff in for 6 months, and then all of a sudden you see the light and you start writing down every single thing that they did, and then you go to the person and say, okay, you're not performing. So I would just say that, think about, number one, what is the learning experience? Because everything is always a learning. And I would encourage you to go back and look at what you did. And I'm not judging it either way. Just make sure that whatever you do is consistent with how you're treating everybody else. That would be my suggestion. Again, not knowing the specific circumstances surrounding this. I don't know if you're in a union environment or you're a non-union environment.
Right.
So all of those, and we're 92% union. We have 22 collective bargaining. So my point in all that is, I just want you to think about all those things that factor into that. And then the other thing I would add is, because I heard the person also say something about, I guess you'd say, how does this impact the other employees? I think you have to just do the best that you can and be consistent, whatever that is. And hopefully, in a perfect world, if you're being a consistent leader, they're going to see your actions and your behaviors, and hopefully people will begin to understand the kind of a leader that you are.
I also think that it has a lot to do with onboarding. So, and sometimes companies don't onboard appropriately, right? There's 2 layers in onboarding. There's onboarding to the company. That's one layer, helping you to understand the culture of the company, helping you to understand who they are, helping you to understand your benefits, all those beautiful niceties that we have to have. But then there's also another onboarding section where you actually work with the leaders, the hiring unit or the department that you're in, and they're onboarding you, even solidifying and helping them to understand that this is the company culture, but it's also how we operate within our division as well.
That's right.
You guys, I think we got about 1 minute left, and I know that we have more questions, and I think what we'll do, I'll download those questions and we'll try to respond to people individually with those questions. So I'm sorry we didn't get to everything. So we need to kind of wrap up here to keep everybody on time. And the next thing that we're going to talk about was, I had asked the panel to provide some resources that they strongly recommended, and I wanted to share these with everybody because I think they're really good. Sonia, so this is about your personal journey in DEI. We talked about, that it's an individual thing and it's a organizational thing. So for your own individual journey, Sonia recommends a short but very powerful video on YouTube that's called Privilege, Class, Social Inequalities Explained in $100 Race. Really amazing video. Patience represents a book called Our Separate Ways, Black and White Women and the Struggle for Professional Identity. Michael's recommendation was Everything You Wanted to Know About Indians But Were Afraid to Ask. And I thought I'd put my own recommendation in, and that is a book called A Good Time for the Truth. It's a series of essays written by people of color in Minnesota. And it's really, if you want to kind of, walk a mile in someone's shoes, this book is a really great way to do that. Just real quickly, the takeaways that we want you to have from today. We know we covered a lot of ground, so the few things that we really want you to remember are that having an inclusive culture isn't only good for people, it's good for the organization. And it doesn't matter where do you begin your DEI work, what matters is that you get started. You want to be purposeful, courageous, and reality focused. DEI is not a project, it's a process. I know we've hit that one a couple times. And that it's important that you step out of your comfort zone and do your own personal growth here. If you keep doing the same thing, you're going to keep getting the same results. So evaluate your company's culture and take action where action is needed, and know that there are resources that are available to you. One of the things that you can do is fill out this questionnaire and let us know how we can help you. We assume that you have a lot of questions left yet. The link shown on the screen has a very short questionnaire that you can fill out. It's completely confidential, And when we get that, we'll respond to you and get you the resources that you need. One of the resources that I strongly encourage you to start with is reaching out to Sonia. She's got a fantastic network of providers and can connect you to the people that you need. And she's offering a free 30-minute consultation to people who signed up for today's webinar. So you can see her information on the screen, and I believe I put that contact information in the follow-up emails as well. Another resource that I wanted to let you know of is the Scitec website has a couple of webinars for employers on job descriptions, interviewing, and onboarding. There's a resource in the handout section that will, if you download the Scitec employer resources, the links will take you directly to those webinars. So check that out. And then the last resource is one that we got after our first DEI webinar in January. Elena Fauché, the Director of Workforce Development for the City of Duluth, was kind enough to reach out and offer their employer action guide on diversity and inclusion, and you can download that from the handouts as well. So thank you, Elena, for sharing that with us. And Sonia and Patience and Michael, thanks again for being my guest today. It has been an honor and a privilege to work with you guys and to get to know you. I've learned so much from all of you. Thanks to everyone else for joining us for this important conversation. A link to the recording from today's webinar will be included in a follow-up email to everybody who registered for the event, and we'll also, as I mentioned earlier, we'll post a recording of this on our website. So thanks again to my team for helping out in the background, and everyone else, have a great day. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Becky.
Thank you.